If this was supposed to be my second chance at life, why was I strapped to a bed in a room with padded walls? That was Ethan Carter's first coherent thought after waking up with a headache, a dry throat, and absolutely no memory of how he had gotten there. His second thought was that the ceiling looked expensive for a hospital. Cream-colored plaster, carved molding, a brass light fixture shaped like a flower. His third thought arrived when a man in a dark vest leaned over him and whispered, "Young Master Vale, please remain calm." Ethan stared at him. Great advice. Tiny problem. Who is Vale? The man's face drained of color. That was not encouraging. Ethan tried to sit up, only to discover soft leather restraints around his wrists. He froze. Not because they hurt. They didn't. Because somewhere deep in his brain, a memory that definitely did not belong to him flickered like a broken movie reel. A mansion. A black carriage. Doctors speaking in hushed voices. A name repeated over and over. Ethan Vale. Ethan swallowed. No, absolutely not. He turned toward the tall mirror across the room. The face staring back at him was young, pale, sharp-featured, with messy chestnut hair and gray-green eyes. Attractive, technically. Also completely unfamiliar. Ethan closed his eyes. "Okay," he whispered. "Either I am having the most detailed stress dream in medical history, or I have finally snapped." Another memory surfaced. Not his memory. A book. The Kingdom of Ashes, a fantasy novel he had finished 2 nights ago while surviving on instant noodles and bad decisions. Ethan remembered the side characters. The royal family. The cursed duke. And one particularly unfortunate nobleman named Ethan Vale, whose entire contribution to the story had been summarized in 3 sentences. He was unstable. He was dangerous. He died early. Ethan's eyes flew open. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." The attendant flinched. Ethan ignored him. He mentally searched the plot with growing horror. Ethan Vale had been confined to a private asylum after allegedly attacking Duke Adrian Blackwood, the most feared man in the Empire and the eventual villain of the novel. 7 days after the story began, Vale was found dead under mysterious circumstances. 7 days. Ethan stared at the wall. "I crossed dimensions just to get a 1-week free trial?" The attendant clearly had no idea what that meant. Before Ethan could panic more professionally, footsteps sounded beyond the door. Slow. Measured. Everyone in the room went silent. The attendant straightened so quickly, he nearly dropped the tray in his hands. Ethan felt something cold slide down his spine. He knew that kind of silence. It was the silence people made when someone important had entered the building. Or someone terrifying. The lock clicked. The door opened. A tall man stepped inside wearing a black coat fitted with military precision. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a face that looked carved from winter itself. His expression revealed nothing. His eyes, a striking blue-gray, settled directly on Ethan. Recognition hit like a bell. Adrian Blackwood. The villain. The man Ethan Vale had supposedly tried to kill. The man who, according to the original story, would one day bring the entire empire to its knees. Ethan's borrowed heart began pounding. Adrian studied him for several long seconds, then quietly dismissed everyone else from the room. The door shut behind them. Silence stretched. Ethan considered pretending to be asleep. Too late. Adrian stepped closer. "Ethan Vale," he said, voice calm and low. "Do you remember me?" Ethan stared up at the fictional villain standing 3 feet from his bed and made the worst possible choice. He answered honestly. "Unfortunately, yes." Adrian did not react immediately. Somehow that was worse. Ethan watched the Duke with the careful focus of a man trying not to startle a very expensive predator. Adrian stood beside the bed, perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Unfortunately," he repeated. Ethan considered lying. He considered fainting. He considered discovering a sudden religious calling. Instead, he smiled weakly. Poor choice of words. Adrian reached down and closed one hand around Ethan's wrist, just above the restraint. Ethan expected cold fingers. He expected interrogation. What he did not expect was Adrian to freeze. The Duke's breathing stopped for half a second. His gaze lost focus. Then his shoulders lowered, barely an inch, as if some invisible weight had suddenly disappeared. Ethan blinked. "Are you all right?" Adrian released him. Instantly, his jaw tightened. His fingers pressed against his temple. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Pain. Ethan knew that expression. He had seen it in exhausted classmates, anxious patience during training exercises, and his own reflection after 2 many sleepless nights. Adrian looked at Ethan again, then deliberately touched his wrist a second time. The tension vanished. Silence filled the room, but Adrian seemed to be listening to something Ethan could not hear. Interesting, Adrian murmured. That word has never ended well for me, Ethan said. Adrian ignored him. How long have you been able to do this? Do what? Make them stop. Ethan's humor disappeared. Make what stop? Adrian's eyes hardened. For the first time, Ethan remembered that the novel had described Adrian's descent into madness in dramatic, almost theatrical language. Whispers in empty rooms. Sleepless nights. Voices that grew louder whenever he resisted them. Ethan had assumed it was fantasy villain decoration. Apparently not. The voices, Adrian said quietly. Ethan stared. Adrian let go again. His expression immediately tightened. Ethan's stomach sank. You hear them right now? Yes. And when you touch me? Nothing. Ethan looked down at his own unfamiliar hand. That seems medically inconvenient. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. It vanished so quickly Ethan wondered whether he had imagined it. You are leaving this place. Ethan looked up. Excuse me. Today. I appreciate the confidence, but I am fairly sure the people outside believe I am dangerous. They believe whatever they are instructed to believe. That sounded extremely villainous. Ethan tried another approach. Where exactly am I going? Adrian turned toward the door. Blackwood Estate. Ethan's heart stumbled. In the original novel, Blackwood Estate was where secrets went to become worse secrets. I think I would actually prefer the padded walls. Adrian glanced back. You do not have a choice. There it is. Very reassuring. The Duke opened the door and spoke briefly to the attendants outside. Within minutes, Ethan's restraints were removed, his belongings were packed, and everyone who had previously treated his confinement like sacred law suddenly behaved as though his departure had been scheduled for weeks. Power, Ethan decided, was deeply unsettling when witnessed at close range. An hour later, he sat inside a dark carriage beside Adrian, watching the asylum disappear behind iron gates. Ethan folded his hands in his lap. So what happens now? Adrian looked at him. Now I determine what you are. Ethan swallowed. I was hoping for breakfast first. Adrian's gaze shifted toward the window, but this time Ethan definitely saw it. The smallest hint of amusement. Then the carriage rolled toward Blackwood Estate, carrying Ethan directly into the home of the man he was supposed to fear, and somehow, impossibly, the only place where Adrian's mind had finally gone quiet. Blackwood Estate appeared just before sunset, rising beyond a long line of pine trees like someone had built a mansion specifically to intimidate visitors. Ethan stared through the carriage window as iron gates opened without a sound. Subtle, he murmured. Adrian glanced at him. What is? Nothing. I was admiring how cheerful your home looks. Adrian followed his gaze toward the dark stone walls and narrow towers. It is practical. That is exactly what a haunted castle would say about itself. Adrian did not answer, but Ethan noticed the faintest movement at the corner of his mouth. Inside, the estate was warmer than expected. Lamps cast soft gold across polished floors, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Servants moved quickly and quietly, each of them bowing to Adrian before staring at Ethan with poorly disguised curiosity. Ethan could almost hear the gossip forming. The lunatic has arrived. Excellent. He had always wanted to become household entertainment. A silver-haired steward introduced himself as Mr. Bell and showed Ethan to a guest room nearly twice the size of his old apartment. Ethan turned slowly, taking in the fireplace, the tall windows, and a bed large enough to host a diplomatic conference. Is this really necessary? Mr. Bell asked, Sir. Nothing. I am adjusting to being kidnapped luxuriously. By dinner, Ethan had learned 3 things. First, everyone in the estate feared Adrian. Second, Adrian had not eaten a proper evening meal in several days. Third, nobody was willing to tell him that this was ridiculous. Ethan found the Duke in his study shortly after 9, surrounded by stacks of documents. You missed dinner. Adrian did not look up. I was occupied. With paperwork? Yes. Ethan stepped closer. That is tragic. I thought villains had hobbies. Adrian finally raised his eyes. You speak strangely. I have been told that recently. Ethan noticed the shadows beneath Adrian's eyes. They were worse than before. When did you last sleep? That is not your concern. You brought me here because apparently my wrist has magical customer service abilities. I think your sleep schedule became my concern somewhere around the kidnapping. Adrian leaned back, expression cool. You are unusually bold for someone who claimed to fear me. I contain multitudes. A silence passed between them. Then Adrian pressed 2 fingers against his temple. Ethan saw it again. The tension, the distant focus, the invisible noise returning. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward and offered his hand. Adrian stared at it. What are you doing? Testing a theory. Which is that you are less unpleasant when your head is quiet. Adrian looked offended. That alone made Ethan feel slightly better. Finally, Adrian placed his hand over Ethan's. The change was immediate. His shoulders loosened. His breathing slowed. His eyes closed for 1 second. Ethan felt no magic, no spark, nothing dramatic. Just warmth. Better? Ethan asked. Adrian opened his eyes. Yes. The answer was so simple that Ethan lost his next joke. For the first time, Adrian did not look like the terrifying man from the novel. He looked tired. Just tired. Ethan pulled a chair closer. Then sit down properly. Adrian stared. I am already sitting. You are sitting like a man negotiating with furniture. Relax. I do not relax. I noticed. Ethan kept hold of his hand and pointed toward the untouched tea beside him. Drink that. Adrian actually looked surprised. Are you ordering me around in my own house? Apparently. You were declared mentally unstable. Finally, a diagnosis that supports my authority. This time Adrian did smile. Barely. Ethan nearly missed it. An hour later, the documents remained untouched. Adrian had eaten half a sandwich, finished the tea, and allowed Ethan to talk him through slow breathing whenever the distant tension returned. Eventually, Adrian's eyes drifted shut. Ethan waited. 1 minute. Then 5. The most feared man in the empire had fallen asleep sitting beside him, still holding his hand. Ethan looked down at their joined fingers and whispered, "This is going to become a problem." Adrian did not wake. Ethan stayed anyway. Ethan woke sometime after midnight with a cramp in his shoulder and absolutely no dignity left. He had fallen asleep in the chair beside Adrian, their hands still loosely connected between them. For several seconds, Ethan stayed completely still, staring at the Duke. Sleeping Adrian looked different. Younger, somehow. Less carved from stone. The sharp tension around his mouth was gone, and without the constant weight behind his eyes, he looked almost peaceful. Ethan immediately disliked how much that affected him. Fantastic, he whispered. I have been here less than a day, and I am already developing sympathy for the terrifying aristocrat. Adrian's fingers shifted around his hand. Ethan froze. The Duke did not wake. Instead, his breathing deepened, as if even unconscious he was afraid Ethan might disappear. Something uncomfortable tightened in Ethan's chest. He gently tried to pull away. Adrian's hand closed more firmly. Not hard, just enough to stop him. Ethan stared at their hands. That is emotionally inconvenient. Morning arrived quietly. Adrian woke before sunrise and released Ethan at once, expression returning to its usual controlled neutrality. You stayed. Ethan rubbed his stiff neck. Your chair is terrible. Your work habits are worse. And apparently, I make questionable decisions when tired. Adrian studied him. You could have left. You would have woken up. Yes. Then there is your answer. For the first time, Adrian looked away first. Over the next 2 days, Ethan began noticing things the novel had never bothered to explain. Adrian avoided crowded rooms, not because he hated people, but because too many voices seemed to make the whispers worse. He refused physical contact from servants because even accidental touches made his expression tighten with discomfort. He drank bitter herbal mixtures every morning that did almost nothing. He worked until exhaustion because sleep brought nightmares. None of that sounded like the cold, heartless villain Ethan remembered reading about. It sounded like a man trying to survive something nobody else could see. On the 3rd evening, Ethan found Adrian standing alone in the library, one hand braced against the edge of a table. Rain tapped softly against the windows. How bad? Ethan asked. Adrian did not pretend not to understand. Manageable. That means bad. You have known me for 3 days. And you are already predictable. Adrian gave him a tired look. Ethan approached slowly. Tell me what you hear. Adrian's jaw tightened. No. Why? Because repeating it makes it real. Ethan stopped a few feet away. Then do not repeat it. Tell me something else. 5 things you can see. Adrian stared at him. This is absurd. Probably. Humor me. A pause. The fireplace. The rain. Your coat. The lamp. The bookcase. 4 things you can feel. Adrian's expression shifted slightly. The floor. My sleeve. The table. He hesitated. Ethan held out his hand. Adrian looked at it for a long moment before taking it. And you, he said quietly. The room seemed to go still. Ethan felt the familiar change in Adrian's posture as the unseen pressure eased. Better. Yes. Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were moving too quickly. This was not some dramatic villain losing his mind for no reason. There was a pattern, a condition, maybe even a cause. Adrian, Ethan said carefully. When did the voices start? Adrian's eyes lowered to their joined hands. When I was 17. Ethan remembered the novel. That was the same year Adrian's mother died. The same year the royal court began calling him unstable. The same year everything changed. A cold realization settled over Ethan. The story had described Adrian as a monster long before he ever became one. Maybe that had been the first lie. Ethan looked up at him. I think the book was wrong about you. Adrian frowned. What book? Ethan's heart stopped. Nothing. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Ethan smiled too quickly. Metaphor. Very complicated metaphor. Adrian clearly did not believe him, but before he could ask more, Ethan noticed something else. A faint dark shimmer moved beneath the skin near Adrian's wrist, gone almost as soon as Ethan saw it. Ethan's smile disappeared. Whatever haunted Adrian was not only inside his head, and for the first time since arriving in this world, Ethan wondered whether the villain had ever been the real danger at all. By the next morning, Ethan had decided that seeing strange shadows under Adrian's skin was probably not something a person should casually ignore. Unfortunately, Blackwood Estate did not come with a helpful pamphlet titled What to Do When Your Host Might Be Magically Cursed. So Ethan spent breakfast pretending to be normal while watching Adrian from across the table. Adrian drank coffee. Ethan watched his wrist. Adrian opened a letter. Ethan watched his wrist. Adrian finally lowered the paper. You are staring. Ethan picked up his toast. I am observing. That is staring with academic confidence. Fine. Your wrist did something strange last night. Adrian became still. Define strange. Dark. Shimmering. Briefly unsettling. Very poor for morale. Adrian looked away. That was answer enough. Ethan leaned forward. You knew? I suspected. Since when? Years. Ethan stared at him. And nobody thought this deserved investigation? Adrian gave a humorless smile. People investigated. They simply preferred conclusions that were convenient. Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Mr. Bell entered and announced that an old physician named Dr. Elias Marlowe had arrived. Adrian's expression hardened. I did not summon him. I did, Ethan said. Adrian turned slowly. You did what? You are welcome. Dr. Marlowe was nothing like Ethan expected. He was small, elderly, sharp-eyed, and carried enough notebooks to look like a walking library. He examined Adrian from a careful distance, asked Ethan several questions, then requested to see what happened when the two touched. Ethan held out his hand. Adrian reluctantly took it. The room changed without changing at all. Adrian's breathing eased. His eyes cleared. Dr. Marlowe's face did not. Again, he said. Adrian released Ethan. A faint dark shimmer appeared near his wrist. Ethan felt a sudden pressure behind his own eyes, like the beginning of a headache. He blinked. It passed. Dr. Marlowe noticed. How often have you been doing this? Ethan frowned. Doing what? Calming him. A few times a day. Dr. Marlowe closed his eyes briefly. Then we have a problem. Adrian stood. Explain. The physician looked at Ethan, not Adrian. You believe you are suppressing the corruption inside him. Ethan's stomach tightened. I am not. No. Dr. Marlowe opened one of his notebooks and turned it around. The page showed 2 circles connected by a narrow line. Corruption does not disappear. It transfers. Silence. Ethan looked from the diagram to Adrian. Transfers where? Dr. Marlowe's expression softened with something Ethan did not want to identify as pity. Into the nearest compatible vessel. Ethan laughed once, because apparently his nervous system had abandoned dignity as a coping strategy. That sounds bad. Nobody laughed with him. Adrian released his hand immediately. Ethan looked down at his fingers. They felt normal. Mostly. So every time he feels better. You take a portion of it, Dr. Marlowe said. Adrian's face changed. Not dramatically. That was what made it worse. The cold control disappeared, replaced by something almost like fear. How dangerous? He asked. Dr. Marlowe hesitated. That depends on the vessel. Ethan swallowed. And this body? The physician looked sharply at him. Ethan realized his mistake too late. This body. Not my body. Adrian noticed too, but Dr. Marlowe seemed more interested in something else. Ethan Vale has shown signs of corruption before. Ethan went still. Before. Years ago. Dr. Marlowe's voice became quieter. He was brought to me because people said he was losing his mind. He was hearing things. Seeing shadows. Forgetting hours at a time. Ethan felt cold despite the warm room. What happened to him? Dr. Marlowe studied his face. That is the part nobody understood. He closed the notebook. The symptoms began shortly after he first met Adrian Blackwood. Adrian stepped back from Ethan as if distance alone could undo the last 3 days. Ethan stared at him, then at his own hands. A memory that was not his flickered through his mind. A dark hallway. Adrian at 17. Ethan Vale holding his hand. The same silence. The same relief. Dr. Marlowe spoke one final sentence, and every joke Ethan had prepared disappeared. You are not the first Ethan Vale to save him. For the first time since arriving at Blackwood Estate, Adrian stopped looking like a man in control. He stepped away from Ethan and did not stop until several feet separated them. No more, he said. Ethan blinked. That sounds dramatic. No more touching. No more staying near me when the symptoms begin. No more attempts to help. Adrian. I said no. Dr. Marlowe quietly gathered his notebooks, clearly recognizing a conversation that had become too personal for witnesses. Mr. Bell followed him out, closing the door with careful silence. Ethan waited until they were alone. You do realize ordering me around only works about 30% of the time. Adrian stared toward the window. Then improve your percentage. That is not how percentages work. No response. Ethan sighed. Look at me. Adrian did not. You were perfectly willing to drag me out of an asylum because I made your head quiet. But now that helping you might actually cost me something, you suddenly discover ethics. That got his attention. Adrian turned. You think this is amusing? No. I think you were scared. Adrian's expression went cold. You know nothing about what I am. Ethan almost laughed. That is becoming less true every day. Adrian walked past him. This conversation is over. It was not. Unfortunately for Ethan, Adrian proved extremely committed to avoidance. For the rest of the day he canceled their meals together, moved his work to another wing, and instructed the servants to keep Ethan comfortably occupied anywhere that was not near him. Ethan considered this behavior mature in the same way locking yourself in a closet during a thunderstorm was technically weather management. By evening, he was furious. By midnight, he was worried. He found Adrian in the west corridor, alone beneath a row of dim lamps. One hand gripped the windowsill. His breathing was shallow. His face had gone pale. Ethan stopped 10 feet away. How long has this been happening? Adrian closed his eyes. Go back to your room. That was not an answer. Ethan. The warning in his voice would have frightened almost anyone else. Ethan had already crossed dimensions, discovered he was living inside a doomed side character, and learned that his new hobby involved absorbing magical corruption. His standards for frightening had changed. 5 things you can see, Ethan said. Adrian shook his head. Leave. You do not need to touch me. Silence. Ethan softened his voice. 5 things. Adrian's breathing remained uneven. Then, slowly, the window, the lamp, the carpet, the painting. He paused. You. Good. For things you can hear. Adrian looked irritated, which Ethan considered progress. Rain. The clock. Your voice. That is 3. Your refusal to obey basic instructions. Ethan smiled despite himself. Excellent. Sarcasm means you are still with me. The tension in Adrian's shoulders eased slightly. Not enough, but enough to prove something important. Ethan had not touched him. Adrian had still responded. See, Ethan said, you can do this without using me as a magical sponge. Adrian opened his eyes. Barely. Barely counts. Not to me. Ethan stepped closer, but stopped well outside arm's reach. Then learn. Adrian stared at him. Ethan continued, quieter now. You keep acting like the only choices are hurting alone or hurting me instead. Those are terrible choices. Very on brand for a tragic fictional villain, but still terrible. Adrian frowned. Fictional. Figure of speech. You are a terrible liar. I have other strengths. A long silence passed. Adrian's gaze lowered. If staying near me changes you, I will not allow it. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. You cannot control every risk. I can control this one. No, you can control distance. That is not the same thing. Adrian looked back at him, and the fear Ethan had noticed earlier was there again, stripped of pride this time. I remember him, Adrian said quietly. Ethan went still. Ethan Vale. Adrian nodded. He used to stand beside me exactly as you are standing now. He said the same things. He told me I was not broken. Then he started forgetting conversations. Losing days. Looking at me as though he did not know who I was. Ethan's humor vanished. Adrian's voice dropped. I watched him disappear while trying to save me. The corridor seemed suddenly colder. Ethan finally understood. Adrian was not pushing him away because he had stopped needing him. He was pushing him away because he remembered exactly what needing someone had cost before. Ethan took one careful step forward. Adrian immediately stepped back. Ethan stopped. All right, he said softly. No touching. Adrian looked surprised. Ethan held his gaze. But I am not leaving either. Adrian stared at Ethan as though those 4 words had rearranged the entire room. You are not leaving, he repeated. Ethan folded his arms. Correct. I am choosing stubbornness. That is not a virtue. Neither is brooding in hallways at midnight. Yet here we are. For a moment, Adrian looked almost offended. Then something softened behind his eyes. Not trust exactly. Something smaller. More fragile. Ethan recognized it anyway. Hope was inconvenient like that. It showed up before anyone invited it. The next morning, Ethan established rules. Adrian hated all of them. Breakfast before paperwork. Fresh air at least once a day. No pretending a headache was manageable when he could barely focus. Most importantly, no touching unless absolutely necessary. Adrian listened in silence from the far end of the breakfast table. You are assigning me a schedule. I am preventing you from turning exhaustion into a personality. I have managed my life perfectly well. Ethan looked around the enormous dining room. You live in a fortress, sleep 3 hours a night, and frighten your staff by existing. I think we can define perfectly well differently. Mr. Bell coughed into his hand to hide what might have been a laugh. Adrian noticed. Mr. Bell immediately became fascinated by the teapot. Progress came slowly. Some evenings Adrian could calm himself with breathing and grounding. Other evenings, he paced the library while Ethan talked about anything harmless enough to keep his attention anchored. Weather. Food. The strange fact that this world had excellent plumbing, but apparently no concept of peanut butter. It is tragic, Ethan explained one night. You have no idea what your civilization is missing. Adrian sat near the fireplace, looking exhausted but amused. I suspect I will survive. That is exactly the kind of arrogance that destroys empires. Adrian actually laughed. It was quiet and brief, but Ethan heard it. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The sound changed something between them. Adrian looked away first. A few days later, the real test came. A formal message arrived from the royal court requesting Adrian's presence at a gathering in the capital. Ethan noticed his expression change before Adrian finished reading. Crowds, Ethan asked. Too many people. Too many voices. Then do not go. Refusing would create questions. You are a duke. I thought creating questions was part of the job description. Adrian gave him a look. Ethan sighed. Fine. Then I will go with you. No. Excellent argument. Very detailed. The court knows Ethan Vale as unstable. Then expectations are already low. That takes pressure off. Adrian's mouth twitched. Later that afternoon, while preparations were being made, Ethan found Adrian alone in the conservatory. Sunlight spilled through tall glass panels, warming the stone floor. Adrian stood among rows of green plants, quieter than Ethan had ever seen him. You should stay here, Adrian said. At the estate? Yes. Because you are worried about me? Because the court is dangerous. Emotionally dangerous or dramatically dangerous? Both. Ethan stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. You brought me here because you needed me. Adrian's expression tightened. That was a mistake. Maybe. Ethan held his gaze. But I am not staying because you need me. Adrian said nothing. Ethan continued, voice softer. I am staying because I want to. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. Adrian lifted one hand, then stopped halfway between them. He looked at his own fingers as though even the possibility of contact carried too much history. Ethan understood. No touching unless necessary. He had made the rule himself. So he made another choice. Ethan stepped forward and gently rested his cheek against Adrian's open palm. Adrian went completely still. No magic flared. No shadows moved. Nothing dramatic happened. That made the moment feel larger. Adrian's hand remained there, warm and careful, as if Ethan had placed something breakable inside it. "You are impossible," Adrian whispered. Ethan smiled. "That has been mentioned." A bell rang somewhere deeper in the estate. Mr. Bell's voice followed from the hallway, calling for Adrian. The moment ended, but not entirely. Adrian lowered his hand slowly. Then footsteps approached much faster than usual. Mr. Bell entered the conservatory, pale and breathless. He held a sealed envelope marked with the royal crest. "Your Grace," he said, "there has been an incident at the south gate." Adrian's calm returned immediately. "What kind of incident?" Mr. Bell looked at Ethan. "Someone attempted to enter the estate using forged papers." Ethan frowned. "That sounds less dramatic than his face suggests." Mr. Bell swallowed. "The papers named you as the intended destination." The warmth vanished from Ethan's smile. Adrian stepped slightly in front of him without thinking. "Who sent them?" Mr. Bell handed over the envelope. Adrian broke the seal and read the single line inside. His expression changed. Ethan had seen anger on him before. This was different. Fear. Adrian looked up. "They were not trying to reach me." Ethan felt cold. "Then who?" Adrian held out the letter. 3 words were written in careful black ink. "Bring Ethan Vale." The letter stayed on the table between them for a long time. Ethan read the 3 words again, then looked at Adrian. "Well, that feels personal." Adrian did not smile. "It is." Mr. Bell remained near the doorway, tense and silent. Ethan tapped one finger against the envelope. "Do we know who wrote it?" "Not yet." Adrian's voice was controlled, but Ethan had learned enough to recognize what lived underneath that control. Fear. Not for himself. That realization landed harder than it should have. Ethan looked back at the message. "Whoever sent this knows I am here." "Yes. And knows I matter to you." Adrian's eyes met his. Neither of them spoke. Mr. Bell cleared his throat softly. "There may be something else." Adrian turned. "Go on." The forged papers carried an old seal. He hesitated. One associated with the Royal Medical Office. Ethan felt a chill move through him. Dr. Marlowe had said people once investigated Adrian's condition and reached conclusions that were convenient. Suddenly, that sentence did not sound academic anymore. It sounded like a warning. Adrian ordered the estate records brought to the library. For the next 2 hours, Ethan sat across from him as old correspondence, medical reports, and court documents slowly covered the table. Most of it was useless. Dates, formal language, carefully polished lies. Then Ethan found a name he recognized. Elias Marlowe. Beneath it was another. Ethan Vale. Adrian. He slid the document across the table. Adrian read it once and went completely still. The report described Ethan Vale as unstable, delusional, and dangerously fixated on the Duke of Blackwood. It recommended immediate confinement. Ethan frowned. "That sounds familiar." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Because it is the report that sent him away." "Who signed it?" Adrian turned the page. At the bottom was the royal physician's seal. Ethan stared at it. So the court decided he was insane. Yes. After he started showing the same symptoms I am showing now. Adrian's gaze darkened. Before either of them could continue, Dr. Marlowe arrived, summoned by Mr. Bell. The old physician looked exhausted when he saw the documents. Ethan pointed to the report. "You knew this existed." Marlowe sighed. "I knew part of it." "Then tell us the rest." Silence stretched. Finally, Marlowe sat down. "Ethan Vale was never diagnosed by me as insane." Adrian's expression changed. "What?" He was frightened, confused, suffering from memory gaps, yes. But he was not detached from reality. Ethan leaned forward. "Then why was he confined?" Marlowe looked toward the closed library doors before answering. "Because he discovered what was happening to Adrian." Adrian went very still. Marlowe continued. "The corruption inside you was never random. It was bound to you when you were 17. Ethan remembered the timeline. Adrian's mother. The first voices. The beginning of everything. Bound by who? Marlowe's expression turned grim. The royal court. The room seemed to shrink. Adrian said nothing. Ethan did. Why would they curse their own duke? Because he was never meant to be destroyed by it. Marlowe folded his hands. He was meant to contain it. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Contain what? Marlowe looked directly at Adrian. Something much older than any of us. Something the royal family could not eliminate, only imprison. Adrian's face had gone pale. Inside me. Yes. Marlowe nodded. Your mother discovered the plan too late. Ethan Vale discovered it years later. Ethan's pulse quickened. And when he tried to expose it, they called him insane. Exactly. The pieces locked together so quickly Ethan almost wished they had not. The whispers. The shadows. The court's convenient story. The villain everyone feared. Adrian had never been the source of the danger. He had been the cage. Ethan stood slowly. Then the original story got everything backward. Adrian looked at him sharply. Ethan barely noticed. His thoughts were racing. If Adrian died, what happened to the thing trapped inside him? Marlowe answered before Ethan could ask. It would be released. Silence. Ethan stared at Adrian. The man the entire empire believed would destroy them was actually the reason they had survived this long. And Ethan Vale had known. That was why they silenced him. That was why someone wanted Ethan now. Adrian looked toward the letter on the table. They think he remembers. Ethan felt cold. Maybe they are right. A memory flickered through his mind. Again. A corridor. A younger Adrian. Ethan Vale whispering something urgently while distant bells rang. This time, the memory lasted longer. There was a door beneath the palace. A black seal. A voice saying, if he breaks, everything breaks with him. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. Adrian noticed. What did you see? Ethan looked up. I think Ethan Vale left something behind. A memory? More than that. Ethan closed his eyes and followed the fragment. Beneath the palace. Below the old chapel. A room no official map mentioned. His eyes opened. There is something under the royal chapel. Marlowe went pale. Adrian stood. What? Ethan swallowed. And I think that is where they made you the prison. The royal chapel looked peaceful enough from the outside, which Ethan immediately considered suspicious. Anything connected to this story seemed to become more dangerous the more respectable it appeared. Adrian stood beside him at the base of the stone steps, dressed in a dark coat, his expression composed, though Ethan could see the tension in his shoulders. Dr. Marlowe had remained behind with Mr. Bell, leaving Ethan and Adrian to follow the memory Ethan Vale had left behind. Last chance to tell me this is a terrible idea, Ethan said quietly. Adrian glanced at him. It is a terrible idea. Good. I feel validated. They entered through a side door and moved beneath the chapel through a narrow passage hidden behind an old storage room. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Ethan did not remember the path exactly, but his body did. Every turn arrived before he consciously chose it. Left at the cracked archway. Down 12 steps. Past a sealed wooden door. Then another staircase. Adrian noticed. You have been here before. Ethan shook his head. I have not. He touched his chest. But he has. At the bottom of the final staircase, they found a circular room carved directly into the stone. Symbols covered the walls. At the center stood a black pedestal surrounded by faded markings. The moment Adrian stepped inside, he stopped. His face tightened. The voices. Ethan moved toward him. How bad? Adrian closed his eyes. Louder than they have ever been. Ethan instinctively reached out, then stopped himself. No touching unless necessary. No absorbing the corruption. Not this time. Look at me, Ethan said. Adrian opened his eyes. 5 things you can see. Adrian breathed slowly. The wall. The pedestal. The doorway. The floor. His voice strained. Ethan waited. Adrian looked directly at him. You. Good. For things you can feel. My coat. The stone under my shoes. The air. He hesitated. Ethan kept his hands at his sides. And Adrian swallowed. My own breathing. Ethan smiled. That one matters. The room seemed to pulse around them, but Adrian stayed standing. Ethan kept talking. Not magic. Not rescue. Just the same grounding they had practiced at Blackwood Estate. 3 things you can hear. Your voice. My breathing. The bell above us. Slowly, Adrian's expression changed. The tension did not disappear, but it stopped controlling him. He was doing it himself. Ethan felt something almost like pride rise in his chest. Then a memory struck. Ethan Vale standing in this same room years ago, speaking to a royal physician. A warning. A promise. If Adrian ever learned to contain the corruption without transferring it, The bond could be broken. Ethan gasped. Adrian. I know why they were afraid of him. Adrian looked at him. Ethan Vale. He discovered that you did not need a vessel forever. Ethan stepped toward the pedestal. You could learn to contain it consciously. That would make the court lose control over you. Adrian stared at the markings around them. So they silenced him and made everyone believe you would eventually become a monster. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Convenient story. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Then we change it. Those words settled between them with unexpected weight. Ethan smiled. That sounds suspiciously hopeful for you. I am adapting. Terrifying. Adrian almost smiled. They returned to Blackwood Estate before midnight. The royal court's request was refused. The medical records were copied. Dr. Marlowe began documenting everything the court had hidden. For the first time, Adrian did not need Ethan's hand to sleep. He still asked Ethan to sit nearby. Ethan pretended not to notice the difference. Days passed. The voices weakened. The shadows faded. Adrian learned to recognize the warning signs before they overwhelmed him. And Ethan learned something too. He had not saved Adrian by becoming something Adrian depended on. He had helped Adrian remember that he was capable of saving himself. One evening, they stood together in the conservatory where everything between them had changed. Adrian looked at him. What happens to you now? Ethan leaned against the window. Ideally, breakfast. Maybe a life with fewer secret underground rooms. You could leave. Ethan studied him. Do you want me to? Adrian was silent. Ethan smiled. That was a very complicated no. Adrian stepped closer, stopping just within reach. Then stay. Ethan looked at him and felt the answer arrive easily. I think I will. Adrian's expression softened. What am I supposed to call you now? Ethan raised an eyebrow. That depends. What was I before? The only person who could make the world quiet. Ethan smiled. Try boyfriend. It sounds healthier. Adrian laughed, low and surprised, and Ethan felt absurdly pleased with himself. Then everything inside him went still. A voice spoke in the back of his mind. Not Adrian's. Not the corruption. His own voice, but older somehow. Familiar. Thank you for saving him. Ethan froze. Adrian noticed immediately. What is it? Ethan stared at the dark reflection in the conservatory glass. The voice returned. Calm. Clear. Now we need to discuss why you are in my body.